Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's CAPI cohort meeting. Just a reminder, if everyone could mute themselves if you're not presenting, that would be great. We have a exciting day today, lots of presentations. So I will just quickly run through the agenda and then we can get going. So we're going to start off with a presentation by Michelle Gluck from the Ulster County Department of the Environment, and she's going to be talking about Ulster County's government operations greenhouse gas inventory, as well as their climate action plan. And then we'll move on to presentations from the cohort. We'll start with Tom Morris from the village of Wappingers Falls, and then move on to Vanessa Bertozzi and Michael Forlenza from the village of Rhinebeck. And then Jamie McDonald will be presenting from the town of Rhinebeck. Then we'll move on to forecasting, target setting, and stakeholder engagement. Kay will be talking about that. And then I'll be talking about monthly FAQ and our next steps. And then we'll end with breakout rooms. So I hope you all will just chime in if you have any questions or put them in the chat. This is informal for newcomers, so we just want to keep this as conversational as possible. And with that, I will hand it over to our first presenter, Michelle Gluck. Thanks, Michelle.
Great. I'm very happy to be here. Good morning, everyone. I see a lot of, familiar faces and colleagues here, so that's awesome. Yeah, and Mary, I can just give like a short, intro. I don't think I ended up sending you a bio, but so I am the senior environmental. Hi, Susan. I'm the senior environmental resource technician for Ulster County Department of the Environment. So, and I started here, late September, early October, 2022. So, still kind of fairly new, but I just wanted to preface that just because obviously, I wasn't working for the county, when the climate action plan and greenhouse gas emissions inventory was created, but but I can definitely explain it all, do the best I can with that. Prior to working for Ulster County government, I was working with Cornell Cooperative Extension, Dutchess County, where I know a lot of you who I see here on the call and my prior colleagues. So again, it's really nice. It's like a mini reunion to be here in a way, presenting to you all. Yeah, so and my background is definitely in broad array of environmental topics, but definitely supporting local municipalities as well as county on climate action work. But I'll leave it at that, just because I know with the packed agenda, probably want a lot of time. So Mary, do I have the ability to just share my screen? Yeah, right?
Yep.
Okay, great. All right. How does that look? Good.
That looks great.
Okay, awesome. All right, yeah, so I'll just, as you all know, I'm here to present about the 2018 Ulster County Government Operations Greenhouse Gas Emissions Inventory and Climate Action Plan. And before I really get into it, I mean, Mary, do you usually save questions for the end, or does it matter? I mean, I don't mind if we pause along the way, but.
Yeah, whatever you'd prefer, Michelle.
Okay, yeah, I mean, if anyone has, some like a burning question, I don't mind if we pause. And then if it seems like we're getting a lot of questions, then we'll save them. But I like, we can keep it kind of informal. So a little background on Ulster County. There's 24 municipalities, 1 city, 20 towns, 3 villages. Population is approximately 180,000 residents, and it was the first county in New York State to achieve silver level New York State Climate Smart Community certification. and that was in 2016. And of course, you know, the county has the goal of gold level certification. Still waiting for that though. To note, you can see the map on your left. Just a little bit about kind of the topography, the natural resources of the county that can impact, you know, just climate, preparedness, adaptation, and mitigation to some degree. So Catskill Mountains, you know, are in Ulster County, and it's kind of like, you know, you have a mix of extremely rural, you know, populations, and then of course, you know, higher density, you know, urban areas like City of Kingston, and you know, Ashokan Reservoir, huge, you know, natural asset, and then various, you know, tributaries. So just want to note that. And then you see the map, you know, with the yellow and green is, if I can get to it, just the municipalities throughout the county that are participating or not in New York State Climate Smart Communities, and then if they've you know, adopted the pledge, how far along are they with certification? And then this last map here is showing disadvantaged communities throughout the county. So yeah, just to kind of get a lay of the land there. And then if you want to learn more, I do, and I imagine the presentation will be shared with you all. So, you know, I look at this, you can reference it later if you want to take a look. But we have a link to the climate change vulnerability assessment that was fairly newly released for the county that my colleague Europa McGovern worked on. All right, just some, you know, relevant updates. We have, you know, as of January of this year, a new county executive, Jen Metzger. Obviously, you know, very climate forward. You know, to note is Executive Order 1 of 2023, which really lays out, you know, action items, and especially for the Department of the Environment, movement forward, along with, you know, what's referenced in our government operations climate action plan of, you know, where we're moving and our directives. To follow that, some details I wanted to share. Working on electrification of the county fleet and transit. So that's, you know, the UCAT, Ulster County area transit electric buses, putting in more EV charging stations. There's 20 ports, 40 chargers, or 40 ports, right, in the county, but, you know, with electrification of county vehicles, as well as, you know, for the general public, the demand is there. A Solarize Ulster campaign is coming along now. One of my colleagues is working on that. We're launching a community climate action plan, hopefully this August or early fall. Another big item is a green procurement, green purchasing. We're participating in the New York State Green Purchasing Communities Program. So that's, you know, we're actively kind of figuring that out, navigating that. Just launched a community food scraps recycling pilot program in just 2 county buildings. And then lastly, I wanted to share that this is very new. Just launched a new internship program called the Climate Corps. And I believe there's 13 interns that just were onboarded like last week. So each of them are stationed in different departments working on climate action initiatives. So it's not just in the environment department. It's, you know, there's IT, DPW, you know, across the board. So really exciting. And then there's a link to that program. So if you want to learn more about that. All right. So moving along. So the county does have a carbon neutral strategy. So basically, the strategy is working, you know, purchasing RECs, although this is like moving forward, this is changing a bit, but it's a combination, obviously, of on-site renewable energy generation, and then purchasing renewable, as local as possible, renewable energy elsewhere, and then offsetting with RECs and purchasing renewable energy credits and carbon credits. And then the image here is the Ulster County, a solar array that's on the closed town of Ulster landfill. So a portion of energy, electricity for the county government operations is provided by this solar array. So that's neat. And just following that, this is just an example. And this is a lot of like the images and tables that I'm sharing are direct screenshots captured and pulled out of the 2018 greenhouse gas emissions inventory and climate action plan. So basically, for example, you have emissions for 2018, and then how much was local generation, and then what's offset with purchasing RECs and carbon credits. So, all right, getting into the actual nitty gritty of the inventory. It was a 2012 baseline year that was used, and again, the plan was developed in 2018. It was developed internally by Department of Environment staff. So that was, at the time, Amanda Laval was the coordinator or director, and then Nick Vasta, who actually just moved on from the county, but he was the environmental technician at the time. So they developed the plan actually internally. Yes, so something to note is that in 2016, there was benchmarking legislation passed by the Ulster County Legislature. So that required annual reporting for benchmarking, and then also green fleets report specifically. So those two reports together contribute to the greenhouse gas emissions inventory. And those reports have to be updated annually. So essentially, we're always, every year, we're updating our inventory. As far as stakeholder involvement for the Ulster County Climate Action Plan, it was internal departments, as well as the Ulster County Environmental Management Council, which actually is a little different than the Dutchess County EMC in that there are active municipal reps or members from each of the individual or local municipalities of the county, or not every single municipality is represented, but a good portion are. So then, of course, general public, the Ulster County Climate Smart Committee, Hudson Valley Regional Council, New York State DEC, Office of Climate Change, all at least reviewed the climate action plan and were involved. All right, and then
implementation.
Yeah, I think that's it there.
Hi guys, just a reminder, if you can please mute yourself, that would be great.
So the inventory involves scope 1 and scope 2 emissions. Oops, whoa, what did I do there? So you have buildings and other facilities, the transit fleet, so the bus system, etc. The vehicle fleet, 4 county vehicles. I guess water delivery, 4 county buildings, and then street lights and traffic signals. All right, emission trends by sectors. So, of course, you can see here buildings and other facilities have the highest percentage of emissions, and then followed by vehicle fleet, transit fleet. This is where, I mean, at the county, this is where it's probably what's interesting, I guess, and unique is where, of course, at the county level, the county does not supply, water, municipal water supply to residents or anything like that, and very few, if any, street lights and traffic signals. So that probably varies greatly from like, a village or a town. For fuel, fuel usage, we have diesel fuel, electricity supply, gasoline, heating oil, natural gas, propane. And of course, the goal is to, electrify for the county. Oh, okay. Yeah, I mean, I kind of just referenced this, but definitely wanted to tease out like, what's a little different at the county level. We did not, so something definitely to note is at the time that this inventory and climate action plan was created, we did not include any information on data on solid waste or in the employee commute. But moving forward, definitely something to consider. And just as an example, I know you probably can't see the graphic very well, but it's again, this is also one of our challenges, but unique to a county scale. This is a list of, at the time, what all the buildings in the county, under the county's ownership and management were, and it's over 20 buildings. So definitely I'll reference this when I talk about challenges, but here you can see exactly what buildings had the highest emissions, which is great. And then here, this is like a rendering of one of the, the strategies and goals, which actually we're actively working on right now. And I don't think it was even included in the list I shared earlier, but doing an assessment of what county buildings are suitable for solar, because obviously huge goal of even 100% electricity generation on site for county buildings. So this actually is captured from that 2018 climate action plan, this image, but it's something we're pursuing right now.
Michelle?
Yes.
Just a quick question. Was the solar array that you talked about earlier that was built on top of the landfill, was that installed prior to 2018, or is that not included?
I believe it was, but I have to double check that for you probably. Yeah, offhand, I'm not sure what year that was.
Okay, I was just curious what.
But no, it had to have been. It had to have been before 2018 because like there's images of it in the plan. So yes, it was pre 2018.
Okay,
sure.
and did you see it made a big difference in the emissions, or?
I think it accounts. I think we can see. Oh my God, I should know this. I feel like it's like 10% for county buildings, but I can definitely get you the exact on that.
Yeah, no worries. I was just curious. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So another example here I wanted to share. So that was the building sector, and then for transit fleet, this is where we're thinking going from actual, inventory analysis to the implementation. So I just pulled out this, this graphic from the climate action plan of action items that were outlined, at the, essentially like to plan for. And going down the list, so that was 2018, we're now in 2023. I can tell you, number one, complete a transit fleet electrification study, that's been completed. Number three, increasing biodiesel use in transit operations, that's been completed. Number four is in progress, installing DC fast charging equipment at UCAT facilities, actively. I think there's three reports installed and 9 more to go. Number 5 also in progress. 6 and 7 as well. So for purchasing electric buses and electric vehicles. Yeah, so I mean, like, definitely the county's referencing the climate action plan and working on implementation. And I just chose that one sector just as an example, because, just in the interest of time. For getting into, challenges and takeaways, this is both like a challenge, but also I think a strength, is that there is annual reporting for the county. This is under the directive of the legislature to the Department of Environment specifically. So we are, doing benchmarking annually, providing a report, as I mentioned before, a green fleets report. So we're constantly tracking and then updating our greenhouse gas emissions inventory every year. I mean, obviously you need the staffing capacity to do so. And with that said, the big challenge at a county, of course, is the scale. And so many, all the buildings tracking every year, okay, what's changed? Have any new buildings come online? Has the county kind of like leased out or, sold any buildings that they're using? Cross communication with different departments, like if you need certain information, get across the way, like you're working with a lot of different departments and different employees. And then definitely data gathering. For us, electricity usage, I mean, it was very challenging this past year. I don't know, I mean, I imagine some of you may kind of have a similar experience just with the gaps with Central Hudson billing information, as well as like for the county, we're have 100% renewable energy. That's the goal. So there's CDG solar accounts to track, and like this is actually something I've been working on this past year to support, and definitely gained a lot of insight there, just into this is has been a major obstacle, but definitely like it's it should be the light at the end of the tunnel is in sight, and it should get better. For just different takeaways, definitely suggest an annual report update if possible. I think it just makes it a lot easier and less overwhelming. And then tracking methods over time. So just streamlining as much as you can, like the data collection, using different portals, or if you have someone like really skilled in developing your own tracking systems for this, very helpful. And then just communication with staff and across departments, and just kind of like making sure everyone's aware of the needs and why, and for both the inventory, but then like planning ahead, and everyone's kind of like moving together. Wanted to just pull up, make sure I didn't miss anything. Yeah, I think that's pretty much what I had that I wanted to touch on. So yeah, thank you all, and I'll take any questions if there are, and my contact information is provided here as well, if you had any follow-up questions, but that's it.
Thank you so much, Michelle. It's so great to hear what Ulster County is doing. You all are such leaders and in everything and all sustainability. And of course, this is a Dutchess County cohort, so good to hear what's going on across the river. I did have one follow-up question. Just in terms of, you mentioned tracking and what a big challenge that's been. And I know a lot of the communities that are part of CAPI are experiencing similar types of challenges. So I wondered,
Yeah.
has the county invested in any software, any kind of tracking documents that you recommend, or have you heard of anything that you think would be helpful to kind of to keep in mind to make this work a little bit easier moving forward?
Yeah, so we definitely use EPA Portfolio Manager. That's available. We're a member of GRITS. I don't know if anyone is familiar with that entity. That program. I'm still learning myself. And I think a lot of colleges use it, but it's essentially, this is more like kind of and making the case or like incentives for tracking different climate action projects. I guess either at like an organizational, whatever, if you're a municipality or like an institution or what have you, but you're tracking these action projects. I guess it's like that kind of other side, the progress side, and then the value of monetary savings actually of these implementation projects. So that's one. Yeah, I mean, but we're trying to use Portfolio Manager as much as we can, but also we had so Nick Vazda, he had created an very powerful Excel spreadsheet that we were using too. So, but we're trying to transfer all that into Portfolio Manager.
You mentioned GRITS, GRITS. Is it GoGrits?
Yeah.
Is that it?
Yeah, I believe that's it. Yep.
Okay, great. I'll put it in the chat just so other people can check it out.
Yeah, and then of course, ICLEI too. I should mention. And I see Kale's.
Thank you, Michelle.
Yeah, can't forget that. Yeah.
Wonderful.
Great presentation. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. And if you want to stay on and listen to the rest of the meeting, you're welcome to. But I think we do have to move on
Okay.
for time's sake, if that's right. And I see you put your email here, and I'll pass that on also to the rest of the group, as well as your presentation. So thank you again for sharing that.
Great. And I can get you follow-up information just on at least your question, and I'll see if there are any other questions as well.
We don't seem to be.
Perfect. Thank you.
All right.
So much.
All right. Thank you very much. Happy to be here, and I might stay on and mute myself. All right.
All right. Great. Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay. So now we're going to move on to Tom Morris from Wappingers Falls, who's going to share with us his results from his greenhouse gas inventory. So Tom, I will turn it over to you.
Hey, good morning, everyone. As Mary said, I'm Tom Morris from the village of Wappingers Falls here in Dutchess County. I currently am the chair of the planning board, but I'm doing this as my side activity. So let me share my screen, please, Mary. Okay, hopefully everybody can see that. Okay, so this is the results of the inventory that we did for the village of Wappingers Falls, trying to get a benchmark as to where things are in the village. So first of all, just so you guys know where the village, you may not be familiar with it. It's very historic. It's characterized by, we got neighborhoods all surrounded by a downtown. The downtown was originally created many, many years ago when there was a bleachery here and a garment industry. We have a central park or greenery. We've got a waterfront. Wappingers Lake actually traverses right through the village. We've got the lake, the creek, as well as Wappingers Falls. Well, basically where the name came from. We have a challenge in that our village actually straddles two towns. We straddle the town of Poughkeepsie and the town of Wappinger. And that, I'll mention that in a little bit on into the presentation and what one of the challenges are because of that in doing this analysis. We're not too far from the Hudson. about a mile and a half from the Hudson, so that keeps us pretty close to, water. Our village is kind of small, 1.18 square miles, with most of that being land and just the lake and the water. And we don't have a large population, just a little over 6,000 folks here. Our inventory was baselined of 2019 for most things. And I have to say most because when we came down to doing the employee commuting, the records did not go back far enough for us to be able to pull that data. So we used the furthest we could go back, which was only a year off at 2020. This inventory included all aspects of the village, and that included our village hall with its village government attributes, the building department, and our court system. Our police department, which you'll see that'll be a big player as we get to the analysis here. A highway department, a water department, as well as a water plant, because we have our own wells here. All the buildings and vehicles, streetlights, wastewater facility, even though it's not the villages directly, we do participate with Tri-Muni, and we do attribute to that. And the employee commute, as I mentioned a few moments ago. We did do our scopes 1 and 2 and 3, quote unquote, for employee commute. And we did have challenges for solid waste. And I'll get into that in a moment. Okay, so just graphically here, if you look at the this here, you'll see what jumps out right away, obviously, is the water and waste water treatment facilities. They use a lot of electric to not only process and pull the water out of the ground, but to treat it and to pump it around the village. And then we have the wastewater treatment, where we have the pumps to pump it there, and then the actual treatment of it. The second behind that was the vehicle fleet, and I'll have a breakdown in another chart here to show you how that went. Buildings and facilities, employee commute, and the lease vehicle, the streetlights. You'll notice I crossed off solid waste facilities, and in a moment, I'm going to tell you why I did that. Okay, this chart might be a little hard to read, but it kind of breaks down each one of the areas so you can see a little bit better. When we looked at our buildings and facilities, we wanted to look at how that energy was being utilized. And you could see in the metric tons of the CO2 for electric versus natural gas. We use a lot more natural gas in our buildings, obviously, because it's the Northeast. We have to heat the building somehow. And right now we haven't converted over to any type of HVAC or anything like that. You can see from our vehicle fleet, we use mostly clean, and the bulk of that is our police department. They have a lot of rounds that they do just to kind of keep the residents safe. We do have diesel. Most of that diesel is used in our fire trucks. You can see it's not very much, it's a small amount. And then we do have ethanol, which we have used in some of our police cars. Now, the next item here is solid waste. I said TBD. Now I'm going to explain a little bit more why that was a challenge for us. The solid waste that is collected by a vendor, Royal Carting. If you're in Dutchess County, you're probably familiar with them. But their records don't go down to the village level. They only go to the town level. So if you look at what happens at the town of Wapanee's transfer station, you'd be looking at 800 and some tons, but that's not the village. That's not even half the village. It's just a small segment of that that's actually the village. And I'm still working at trying to, how would I figure out what portion of that from the town of Wapanee's belongs to the village? And then on the other side, the other part of the village, which is in the town of Poughkeepsie, it's the same thing. They have a larger number, but the village is only a small piece of that. So I've got challenges to try to figure out how I can break that out, since the carrier doesn't break it out directly. So that's a big to-do for me. We looked at the employee commute. Now, as I said, the employee commute, we didn't have records back far enough to go to 19, so we went to 2020. Another challenge I had was trying to break down that information by the employees. Employees are well, first of all, not all the employees are still here. We have some new employees, etc. So couldn't gather all the information. So what was used was basically addresses for all the employees, to where they actually work, get that mileage, and then use that mileage and average fuel consumption based on government websites to try to get a approximate commute value. And that's where we come up with the number you see right there. Our streetlights, obviously not a big kicker here, but it's on the list. And then water and wastewater. So with this chart below, you can see that the big bulk of this is the Tri-Muni processing plant for the village. The water plant is with natural gas and electric is a smaller piece, and then the wastewater village pumps to pump it to Tri-Muni is a real small piece, but it's still part of the big picture. One of the things that we'll talk about when I start doing our projects, etc., is it's interesting to note that our water plant actually has its own solar field, and we'll be breaking down how much of that is offsetting what we're actually utilizing right now. But what you're seeing on this chart is what we actually pay to Central Hudson for gas and electric. Okay, some of the challenges that we had, as I said before, 2019 not available across the board. The solid waste records did not break out the village portions, and I explained that how we have across the two towns. I need to do some more research to try to figure out how I'm going to get some of that missing data, but that's a challenge on me. So if any of you folks out there have had a similar situation, I'm all ears for some guidance as to how I can kind of break that out. Collecting data required a reliance on the staff who were typically busy, very busy, and trying to get them to put this as a higher priority over, their day-to-day emergencies was a challenge. So that's something I think we need to work on. And the creation and assumptions of calculations were at times not straightforward. So, but as you heard, I had to take some assumptions with the commuting and other aspects. So some of the takeaways, you saw that the police department and Tri-Muni were the big kickers here. And so we'll be looking at those to try to see what we can do to help reduce that. The inclusion of the solid waste would have been helpful here for the big picture. So that's the only one we don't have. And going forward, anything from 2020 forward, we got the records on. So if we focus on 2020 forward, I think we'll be in a better situation. This next bullet is just, I think is important because when I approach the staff, etc., I need to have some kind of relatable climate education. Not everybody sees the impact as right here, and we need to do stuff today. And that any assistance and guidance and some kind of education that I can share with the staff, that would be greatly appreciated. And then if I could have more assistance, I'm trying to drum up some assistance here. But I think that's it. I think everybody can put that one on their list. Okay. And then just a bunch of folks who are very, very helpful in getting this data for us. Lauren from Vassar College, Mary have been outstanding. I wouldn't know what to do without relying on Mary there. John Carge, our village clerk, Heather McCormick, Karen McLaughlin from Tri-Muni, and Laura Giava, our village treasurer, which helped get me some of the data I needed. So that's what I have. If there's any questions or anything, I'd be more than happy to make my best effort to answer them. Okay.
Thanks, Tom. I did have one comment, which is just that well, first of all, great job. But also I wanted to say that there are a number of communities that have also had similar challenges with rural carting. And, maybe having this cohort might be a good opportunity to kind of come up with a strategy to put some pressure on them to somehow break out that data for you if at all possible. So I know it's just been a frustration for a number of years as well. So just something to keep in mind moving forward. I know there are at least 3 other municipalities that have also complained about it. So
Okay, well, my thought process here, if I could just share a little bit, is that I was going to approach Royal Carting from the standpoint, well, you just give me all your customers across the board in the town, whether it be Wappingers or Poughkeepsie, and then tell me how many of those customers are in the village, and then I'll take care from there. I'll just do the basic math. That may or may not be accurate, but it's going to be as close as we can get, because I'm not sure Royal Carting's gonna break it down any more than that. But any help would be greatly appreciated.
thanks, Tom. It sounds like a good strategy. Okay, and if any of you have questions moving forward, obviously you know how to reach Tom. But congratulations on completing this. I know how much time and effort you put into this. So I am incredibly appreciative, and I know Lori and the rest of the municipality is as well. So thank you. And now moving ahead, I know we have a couple more presentations, so we'll just jump right in. I think Vanessa and Michael, you're up next from the Village of Rhinebeck. No, I'm sorry. Is it? Yes, sorry. Village of Rhinebeck. Vanessa and Michael.
Hi, yeah, hi, I'm Vanessa Bertozzi. I'm a village trustee and run our Climate Smart Task Force. And Michael is one of our task force members who has been really critical in this process. So, and yeah, Tom, great job. Michelle too. I think that our presentation will probably be, fairly similar, as we are also a village like Wappingers Falls. Let me share my screen. Okay. Slideshow. And fun fact, Karen McLaughlin from Tri-Muni is also our village treasurer. So glad to see her name come up. Are you all seeing that, or is it?
No, we don't see anything yet.
It's black. Try again. Okay. Try. Okay, here we go. Now I'll share my screen. All right, how's that?
Got it.
All right, great. Okay, so here we go. A little background on the Village of Rhinebeck. We're pretty tiny, just about 2,600 people. Historically, the home of the Sapascots, clan of Muncie, Delaware, Native Americans. We're a pretty, dating back to 1686 is when European settlement came about. And interestingly, we are at the intersection of the old Sapasco Trail, the Native American Trail, and the King's Highway, Route 9. And we have a lot of old buildings. We have one of the nation's largest historic districts. We did achieve bronze certification in March 2020. And so some of our projects that we have accomplished, such as installing EV charging stations. Recently, we switched our streetlights to LED. We're working on composting. Those are more recent additions. And we did install solar on our village hall a number of years ago. So we chose the baseline year of 2018, 2019, as you all did, in part because of, we wanted a pre-COVID year, and also because of the Central Hudson issues. But, we have made some, we have accomplished some of those emissions reduction projects in the meantime. So really looking forward to our next greenhouse gas emissions inventory, where we'll be able to take credit for those things. As you all know, this is the government buildings and operations greenhouse gas emissions inventory. So we're looking at our pretty small portfolio of buildings. Our village hall and fire station are one building. We have a police station, highway department, garage, water treatment plant, wastewater treatment plant, as well as our outdoor lighting, street lighting, vehicles, employee commute, and a couple of extra things that I'll talk to as we go through. We did include, of course, scope 1 and scope 2, and a little bit of scope 3. Again, those are some odds and ends that I'll discuss as we go through. So here's where we shake out, sort of similar to Wappingers Falls, in that our water and wastewater treatment plants are producing the most emissions, but then we're followed by our buildings and facilities, and then vehicle fleet, and then 13%, not insignificant, our employee commute, and then solid waste facilities. We also had challenges, much like Tom, and I'll speak a little bit about that. And then our streetlights, traffic signals, and then for process and fugitive emissions, which is one of the scope 3 items we included, we did account for clothing purchased by the village government for uniforms for our employees. So let's look at the largest contributors, the water and wastewater treatment system. And so the actual emissions from the process is what we're talking about here. The electricity to power the plants as well. You can see the electricity for the water plant, electricity for the actual wastewater plant. And then there's the effluent from the wastewater plant. Fun fact, we do take the biosolids from our wastewater treatment plant and those are hauled away and composted, which is the best we could do at this point. And then the second largest contributor is buildings and facilities. A real standout here is the old furnace in Village Hall, which we do have plans on replacing since it's at the end of its life. And hopefully we'll be replacing it with some sort of heat pump system. One of the challenges with our top 2 sectors of emissions is that we did have some difficulty parsing the data, right? Because, with the buildings and facilities, we have electricity as well as heating oil, propane, but we don't have the electricity from the wastewater and water treatment plants, because the electricity, you can't really parse out which electricity is going to actually power the processes of filtering and treating water and wastewater versus powering air conditioners or the lights per se. So those 2 largest sectors are a little bit married to each other, and hard to pull out the electricity. Next, we have our vehicle fleet. The way this is tracked by our village is by fund. So we have the water fund, which is the water treatment plant. We have wastewater, which is a fund, which is obviously the wastewater. And then general, which includes both the highway department as well as police and fire. So we didn't, because the gas and the diesel is purchased in that manner, we didn't have a way to necessarily to break it out, for example, by which vehicle was burning how much of the fuel. It's all tracked under that one account. We did a really great list of all of the off-road machinery and lawnmowers, but we don't again have a way of tracking how much fuel was used in particular for that segment of the machinery. And then we get on to some of the smaller contributors. Our employee commute as I mentioned, is 13%. We did include our EV. The mayor drives an electric vehicle to work, so hooray for him. And another challenge here was actually trying to pin down the carbon footprint of our volunteer firefighters, who could have been anywhere, right, when they were called to an emergency, our firefighters and our EMS. So we did kind of a workaround there where we just we took their home addresses and we just used that as a proxy for wherever they may have been when they came to Village Hall / fire station. And then for solid waste, which we did include that segment in this inventory. However, we're really only looking at yard waste mulching, which you see here in the picture, because here in the village we use a private hauler for our solid waste, and that is the amount of tonnage is not tracked. And so one of our main takeaways, we need to do a solid waste audit to be able to understand how much is being recycled versus how much is being sent, and where is it being sent? Is it being sent to a landfill, or is it being sent to the incinerator in Poughkeepsie? And then streetlights, they're only 2% of emissions in this inventory, but that will be even reduced much more because in the meantime, we have switched to LED. So looking forward to that in the next inventory. And then, as I mentioned, the clothing and the uniforms are part of that fugitive emissions. Michael, go ahead. You want to do this slide?
Yeah, this was an interesting aspect of our inventory. Village of Rhinebeck trees. We have a tree commission in the Village of Rhinebeck, which maintains our status as Tree City USA by the Arbor Day Society. There's an active tree planting program twice a year. Volunteers come out and plant street trees. And all the trees are tracked by the tree commission in a software called Tree Keeper. You can see the little map on the right. These little dots are all the trees. And so Tree Keeper tracks how big the tree, a volunteer has to go out and measure them all, but they're geolocated and tracking the size of them, the diameter of the trunk. And so it comes up to a little less than 2,000 street trees. This doesn't count the trees that are on private property in the middle of plots of land. And the other facet of this Tree Keeper is it calculates greenhouse gas benefits. And this is a little snapshot from the software, and it shows an amount of CO2 avoided and amount of CO2 sequestered. And sequestered is, incorporated into the tree itself, and avoided has to do with the shade that is produced by the trees or the windbreak that is provided by the trees, which avoids energy use for heating and cooling. So we took, on ClearPath, there under buildings and facilities, there is a category for emissions and removals from trees outside of forests on local government land. So we plugged those numbers into that category, ClearPath, and it came up to 276 metric tons of CO2 equivalent saved. That is about half of the total village CO2 emissions, greenhouse gas emissions. So it seemed like something was wrong. And it turns out that these numbers are in Tree Keeper are a 20-year time frame. So they couldn't directly be translated into a single year of greenhouse gas inventory. It seems like it's a valuable, trees are obviously a valuable resource in the fight to neutralize greenhouse gas emissions, but we need to understand a little better about how these translate in a year over year greenhouse gas inventory. So we marked it as information only and ultimately didn't include it in our greenhouse gas inventory.
Thanks, Michael. Yeah, we did, and we reached out to the folks who do this modeling for Tree Keeper, and they said they're working on a tool to be able to do it annually, to be able to see these benefits, not in a 20-year time period, but annually. So hopefully, again, by the next inventory, we'll be able to plug in our trees and see how much they're helping us. So that we thought was interesting. We're going to include that information in our written report, like as a little aside, but we weren't able to plug it into ClearPath for now. So what helped us, you know, as you can see, we're a pretty small municipality compared to, say, the County of Ulster. We also really want to thank Chrissy Denew, our deputy clerk. Her bookkeeping is pretty amazing. She's got spreadsheets for everything. So that was a huge help. Even though sometimes, you know, her bookkeeping didn't quite match up to the level of detail that we might have liked. For example, we didn't have fuel use by vehicle by year. And then we had to, you know, come up with some workarounds. I mentioned you know, how to estimate the commute for the volunteer firefighters and the EMS. You know, we also had some privacy issues. So we asked for the police secretary to compile the commute info for us for our police departments, since they really don't want their home addresses listed anywhere and what might become, you know, public documents. And then we also, you know, when it came to gathering information, we leaned more on the department heads and asked them to compile information from their staff. And that also seemed to be a useful technique. So, you know, our takeaways is, wow, water and wastewater processing is really emissions intensive. We are looking at updating those two plants. And so we should really have an eye working with engineers on how to make those processes and the machinery more emissions friendly. And then Village Hall and Firehouse heating is a huge chunk. And as I mentioned, that's a project that we're looking at, how to get rid of that furnace. And the frustrations around solid waste and how to track that's a bit of a nut for us to crack. You know, it was, I think having all of our municipal staff come to that first kickoff that Cappy did at Dutchess County CCE was really helpful. We did find that, you know, people were bought in. But, you know, having Michael here to help as a volunteer was also incredible. So we're thinking for the second part of Cappy, as we move into the climate action plan, it might be helpful for us to you know, meet with each different department and talk about what it means for their operations and their buildings and see what their ideas they have. And then to also do a community presentation. Maybe we can even adapt this presentation and do it at an open meeting, and try to recruit more community members to volunteer to help and get involved. Of course, I want to thank Cappy. This is an incredible support program, and ICLEI, and all the folks at Village Hall, Mayor Bassett, our clerk, Martina McClinton, Chrissy Denew, our deputy clerk, and our DPW superintendent, Carl Amy, and then all of our department heads and point people who helped along the way. Here's our contact info if any of you want to follow up. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you so much, Vanessa and Michael. That was really interesting and informative. And just a quick question: do you guys use Royal Carding for your solid waste as well?
You know, we use Welsh, which might be owned by Royal Carding, which is another thing that's really confusing.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
And then also in terms of the uniforms, I was so interested to see that you included that, and I assume that's for the firemen and the policemen and those uniforms. Is that what you're talking about when you mention uniforms?
You know what? I would have to go double check, but I think that the uniforms might just be the for the wastewater treatment plant, the water treatment plant, and the highway department. I'd have to see Yeah, I'll have to check on that. That's a really good point. Yeah, but all the staff have an allowance for buying uniforms to wear at work as they go, because some of the jobs are pretty dirty jobs, so they get to wear uniforms.
And then how did you calculate the emissions?
There is actually the reason I thought to do it is because the ClearPath tool had an item where you could put in the amount of clothing. And so I asked our village clerk, and she was like, "Oh yeah, we have the amount of clothing that we purchase every year." So we just plugged it in.
Fascinating. Great to know.
Yeah.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's definitely an extra credit type of sector. We call it consumption-based emissions accounting when we start to get into like textiles and food purchasing and other areas. Yeah, so really cool that you're going down that path here. And just want to say it's like not required that other people look into that, but we've got a great example here if
Yeah.
folks want to.
Yeah, we were also thinking that maybe the next time we do an inventory, it'd be cool to include, the amount of paper that we purchase. Just thinking off the top of my head, like what are the main things that we need to run the municipal government? It's a lot of paper.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you both again. And I see you provided your email addresses, so if anyone wants to follow up, that'd be great. But this is really, really interesting and great job. So we'll move on now to Jamie McDonald, who's going to be reporting for the town of Rhinebeck.
Good morning, everyone. Started. Okay, yeah, so my name is, excuse me. My name is Jamie McDonald. I'm a program manager for a small nonprofit that's based in Dutchess County. It's called the Center for Economic and Environmental Partnership. And I've been working with the town of Rhinebeck as well as the city of Peekskill in Westchester County for the past 6 or 7 months to help them with the CAPI process, as well as some other programs like climate smart communities and clean energy communities. So a quick little history here. The town of Rhinebeck has a population of 7,650, a size of just under 40 square miles, right on the Hudson River. And then some environmental or sustainability initiatives that have recently been done. The town collaborated with the village to complete a natural resources inventory in 2022. And then just recently, the town received Clean Energy Communities designation for the unified solar permit, LED streetlight conversion, EV charging stations, and then most recently it just joined the Hudson Valley Community Power CCA program. And then in the next couple weeks, we will be submitting an application for Climate Smart Communities Bronze certification. And so, of course, the baseline year was 2019. We included the town hall, highway department, library, cemetery, transfer station, and street lighting. And some notable emissions, the town does not have a water treatment, wastewater treatment, or a solid waste facility. And then, of course, as for scopes, we included 1 and 2 fully, and then for scope 3, it was just the employee commute. And before I get into the breakdown of the emissions, I just wanted to talk about challenges. I think employee commute was the biggest challenge. It sounds funny saying that. The town's pretty small, so it wasn't that big of a challenge. But getting responses it took quite a bit of time. We eventually got good responses, but it took a lot of effort. I know this was mentioned before, but communication with the busy staff and asking these busy staff members to participate in gathering information was certainly challenging. I live in Philadelphia, and so it's even more challenging to work almost entirely through email. But I was able to visit Rhinebeck a few times, and it was far more productive to be there in person. So I will be doing that more often. And then just ensuring a complete inventory. I would think that I had everything that I needed for the inventory, and then I'd have another conversation and I'd learn that there's another sector or building or something else. And so certainly not being directly employed by the town or being a resident of the town, it was challenging to get that whole picture of what needed to be included. And so here are our results. As you can see, there's only 4 sectors. Streetlights and traffic signals is the smallest at about 2.6%. The employee commute was next at about 6.2% of total emissions. Buildings and facilities was 18% of emissions. And the giant orange piece of the pie is our vehicle fleet. 304 metric tons of CO2 equivalent, and over 70% of total emissions. So that was a little surprising. I expected the vehicle fleet to be the biggest, but not that big. So yeah, our takeaway is that the vehicle fleet sector is certainly larger than I expected it to be. And then just looking forward, I'm hoping to work with the bookkeepers for the town to try to incorporate this record keeping into their day-to-day activity, hopefully to do so without overburdening them, because they do work very hard. Whether it's through ClearPath or Energy Star Performance Manager or another program, it'd be great to incorporate that into the day-to-day operations. And this has been mentioned by others, but educating municipal staff, I definitely think would have been beneficial before starting this, especially coming into a community that I'm not fully aware of and knowledgeable of. There was a big learning curve, and so had I taken the time initially to educate the staff on what I was doing and what types of information I was looking for, they may have been able to just provide that for me and save me some time. So certainly something to take with me to the next time. And lastly, this, aside from the huge support that I got from Mary and from Cale and his team, this was largely an independent effort. And so as we move on to the climate action plan, it's going to have to be much more collaborative and involve much more staff and community members. And so, yeah, thank you, Mary. You've been hugely helpful throughout this, and Cale and your team at ICLEI, Supervisor Spinzia and Deputy Supervisor Pulver and the whole team in the town, and then, of course, the DEC Climate Smart Communities for the financial support. So thank you all.
Thanks, Jamie, and thanks for providing your email address there too, if anyone has any follow-up questions. Awesome job. And I really also liked how you called out what you didn't include. I think that's something to just keep in mind for everyone. I know for climate smart communities, sometimes they're pretty particular about that. They want to know that you've thought about everything, and that if you don't have one of the sectors or some set of data, that you're specifically calling that out. Especially refrigerants is kind of a new area that they are particularly keen on every municipality calling out as well. So just keep that in mind when you're writing up your report to mention that you don't have any large scale refrigerants, if that's the case in the community, and that's why it's not included. As well as a wastewater treatment plant or whatever else there is that isn't being included. But that was great. Thank you. Congratulations and great job. I can't imagine trying to do this one person, not living there, not working for the government. So kind of a Herculean task, and I'm really impressed. Great job.
Well, thank you very much for all your support. You made it much easier.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's what we're here for. So I'm thrilled that everyone is making such good progress. And we will have more presentations at the next meeting, I'm sure. But for now, we're going to move on. I know Cale has a presentation that he would like to share with everyone. So Cale, I'll hand it over to you.
Great, thanks, Mary. Get my screen share set up. That was really cool to see. Some of our first communities that are finishing the inventory and how you like give the context for your different ways that you're approaching climate action. I mean, I could see a lot of similarities, like clearly lots of stakeholders involved. Interestingly, the acknowledgements slide that you all shared really jumped out at me of like, oh wow, I often think of the inventory as like a mostly desk exercise. You're collecting data by email, etc. And it's so much more of a stakeholder engagement process in and of itself. And I think that really came to life here. And that at least a couple of you are reporting that some of that stakeholder work could happen up front. Like, it inherently was part of the data collection, but there's more like background education before you even launch into the inventory, this kind of broader climate action planning. So I just like generally like to, think with you all as we head into the climate action planning phase. Like what really are the needs, the education needs, and who should be at, that first presentation. Like what I'm going to talk about right now is kind of this like heading into a phase 2, the climate action planning piece, and that's almost like a fresh start for all of us. A fresh start with some more like armed with some more communications tools, because you have this inventory data. Like you've got something to present and like show up with like, all right, we've got, background information. Now let's make a game plan. And so it's just really, interesting to see how everyone is like, setting the scene of your community. And then uncovering some good analysis too. Like Vanessa, whenever you're sharing about that single building that's like basically half of the building's emissions, and I wonder if like you suspected that or knew that going into this process, or if that was something new that was revealed. In either case, it's like very stark, like that kind of insight there. So yeah, great presentations. I'm excited for next week's too. I'll spend about, I think it's like 10 minutes or so, kind of mapping out what the next phase, this kind of phase 2 can look like. It's the action planning phase. We're still really focused on local government operations, but we've got this, background source data for emissions. So this is like you have your greenhouse gas inventory, now what? And by next time we meet, even more of you will be in the now what. And the next step in this now what phase is the forecasting of emissions change over time, and then using that kind of trajectory of how emissions are going up or down in your community over the next years and decades. You're able to set a target for how your community will reduce emissions by what rate and by what total amount and when. So we'll talk about what all that looks like at a really high level. Today is just like overview, and then we'll get into the nitty gritty, like technical detail of how to do this stuff in an upcoming session. And then finally, we'll speak a little bit to the stakeholder engagement process. You all did stakeholder engagement. You found out maybe as you went along. But in the climate action planning phase, it's more intentional and like very much like a key component of climate action planning. So let's look at a little timeline here. This is entirely an example, a real example out of Washington, D.C. I like DC's graphic because it's really clear, and it also tracks with how most communities progress on a climate action planning process. They did have a full year. So this slide and the next one goes through the whole cycle. In I mean, I always advise, like, budget at least a year for most communities. DC's a big, a big district, a big city. So definitely needed the year. A smaller community, can speed through this. You all have been very enmeshed in the data. So you also are like coming in with fresh, hot off the GHG inventory, also can help speed things along. But in general, there are different phases to a climate action plan. And community engagement or stakeholder engagement is how we'll refer to it with the government operations frame. That's very, seminal to the process. So in DC, like, they began there. They started with focus groups. In your work, that could just be departments, like, and you're having these kind of like, I don't even think they have to be individual meetings, but you should plan that you're going to get key stakeholders in the government together at one moment or a couple to talk about the planning process. And there are better times to do that than others, and we'll talk about that. In this case, DC's working at a community wide, so you can see, like, they're reaching many of their residents, and they're having these pop-up conversations around town. So that's great at a community wide level. You can even begin to think like, well, what's the, how does that transfer to a local government scope? It's really making sure all your departments are involved, especially those that are critical to your high emitting sources, like that boiler that needs to be replaced. Like, that's how you can identify who must be at the table. So you're getting in, sharing what you found, like these presentations you gave today, that's exactly the presentation that you will give to stakeholders. And then you're starting to say, we know our emissions, what do we do with that? What are your thoughts as stakeholders on the best place to put our time and energy, future DEC grants and all that, to really target the highest emission sources? So here in DC, they're moving from that engagement phase into drafting a framework. Like, here's our strategy to approach emissions reduction. And from there, now we can start making the plan. And then finalizing the plan in about a year's time frame for them. This process is very tried and true. I've mentioned many times this graphic that hundreds of cities have followed. You all have completed milestone 1, or you're about to. And so we're moving into milestone 2 here with the establishing a reduction target. It's a lot faster than milestone 1. You can do the reduction and target setting exercise in a few days, honestly, maybe a few hours in some cases. It's a modeling exercise, a mathematical exercise to start. And then it has that political side of, like, your community adopts or accepts, whatever the reduction target is. So of course that part's trickier in some places than others. And then from there, you've got your target and you make your plan for how you're gonna get there. Ultimately doing the plan, right, and tracking the progress over time, which will all be a post-CAPI kind of process. So CAPI is going to take us through step 3 here, milestone 3. For today, let's just spend a couple minutes on that next step, on the next milestone, which is forecasting and target setting. And a good place to begin is just getting our terms down and understood. So you all completed a greenhouse gas inventory, which reveals the current emissions. It's a snapshot, right, of 1 calendar year of time. Here's total, bulk gross emissions that were produced by government operations in 1 single year. From there, we can create a forecast that's built from that year. So if your year was 2019, it's like, okay, starting in 2019 and going out to 2030, out to 2040, 2050. So into the future, where are emissions headed? Are they going up? Are they going down? That's a forecast. And to do that forecast, you need some inputs. A good pop quiz right here. What might be some of the inputs that are going to influence the trajectory? You can put some in the chat or just like yell a couple of them out. Or maybe I already asked you, some of you. Yeah, exactly. Thank you, Vanessa. Population is a big one. In the case of a government operations forecast, we're thinking about number of employees that, maybe your government is growing in size by employees for some reason. Maybe your town in general or your village is growing like at a community wide, and that's going to put increased pressure on a wastewater treatment plant. You'll need to buy extra, pumps or something, some sort of facility expansion that's driven by your community's population growth in itself. Maybe more street lights, yeah, new buildings. I see that here. That one's huge. You may already know like these kind of like capital improvements that are set to happen. So yeah, thanks, Michelle. New buildings, exactly. Another major influence is the grid. So this is more New York State, and the utilities are driving how emissions will change at the grid scale. But we have some good indications, some good like reports that the state puts out around the Climate Act that are projecting grid change. So like those also are going to feed into the forecast. All of these inputs are entered into a forecasting section of ClearPath. So this ICLEI tool you've been using pulls over your data automatically from the inventory. And then we're just like, okay, add in population change, add in the percent change of the carbon intensity of the grid in, it happens to be 5-year increments. So that's the kind of stuff we'll look at together next time when more of us are along that path, are ready for that step. But that's how that's all going to play out. And then finally, a target. A target is it's a goal, but it's like time bound. It's a goal it's a good goal. It's a goal by a certain year. It's a percentage reduction below a baseline year. Your baseline year is probably the one of your inventory, because that's when you're sure about emissions. You know that they happened in 2019 and at what level. So now you can set a target to reduce. So I'll pause there for a question that I see from Vanessa. Would switching your fleet to electric be added here, or is that an action in response to a forecast? Good question. I think it can happen in 2 spots. One is the forecast. I think, so I'll check with Caroline, but you may already, as a government, have said like, we're going to switch over 5% of our fleet every year. And if that's like pretty built in, or you're pretty sure that will happen, then it's fine to go ahead and put it into the forecast. So let's think about that stage. The next step after forecasting is the planning. And that's when you're like, we're gonna help more employees carpool. We're gonna switch out that boiler system. These are the individual actions that you model out. And so 100% sure that you will put the EV switching into the planning stage. So one way or another, it's gonna be built into your process in a really data focused way. And I'll just have to double check if it can be at the forecast step. Okay. This is kind of like the components of forecasting and target setting visualized. You've seen many graphs like this, and your government will end up having one, or your community. where you've got your baseline. That's the dotted line in the middle. This particular community had 2020 as their baseline. That's when they did their inventory for. And then they were forecasting out based on a few scenarios. So they had this adopted policies that's the red, or maybe it's black, but the line at the top. They call it adopted policies. More what you see it referred to as business as usual. It's basically like nothing's changed. We're following our adopted policies, whatever we're on track for today. And you can see that emissions are rising pretty steeply. That is often the case in a business as usual forecast. And that's where we'll start all of you out on. Everyone will have your BAU forecast. Then you can, some of you can, I mean, that's the minimum. Like, you're fine to proceed with a BAU because you're going to add on, like, I'm switching that boiler out. I'm going to glaze my windows in City Hall, etc. So that's going to start to layer on and ratchet down your business as usual forecast. So it's totally fine to just keep BAU and move into planning from there. Some of you may do like this community does and want to like go ahead and say, well, we know EV switching is part of it. So this, Vanessa, is that that scenario playing out. It's like we've got a low ambition and a high ambition scenario. In this case, the low ambition, that's the teal. It's like, yeah, emissions dip a little bit. And then for whatever the assumptions are, by around 2040, 2045, they begin to rise again. And then a high ambition scenario, you know, that's a deep, a 40% reduction. And we got to call out, there's still a gap here to 2050 to be truly like aligned with the Paris Agreement. This is a carbon neutral future. And we're going to talk more about that. Great. So we'll pause there with Michelle. Mary's earlier question. Michelle looked it up, and the county's solar array on the closed town of Ulster landfill provides 20% of the government's electricity needs. Wow. That's amazing. Yeah. Nice job to Ulster County. And then Eleanor, hi, what are some reasons emissions would be rising in a government ops business as usual forecast? Because there's no because a population change is positive, and there's no like moving away from natural gas is one example. It's basically you have fuels you're using times a population growth. That's typically what is always going to be a positive thing.
Yeah. So was this inventory or this forecast done in a place with high population growth? The one
this one is, yeah, and this one was community wide. So that's that's definitely going to be that. Another thing that could be going on here is like a state that doesn't have a renewable portfolio standard or something. Because let's see, this is like it's adding half. Yeah, it's like 50% more emissions over 2020. So there's a lot of not great things going on that's driving that.
So in New York State, because our grid is getting cleaner, is it possible forecasts would, and we're in an area with not a lot of population growth generally, I think, right? New York State and the Hudson Valley too. Like, would we see a slight decline in forecasting even with business as usual, do you think? Or do you still see an increase?
Yeah, great question. I think you would see a decrease. Because the grid is such a huge influence. So New York is, if not a full increase, then it's like a very slight, if it's not a decrease, very slight increase. So I don't know, is this getting into sine, cosine, and tangent? Yeah, or something? I don't know, like the steepness of the line is not going to be anything like you see on the screen here. Yeah, and that is a factor that will feed in. So thanks for calling that out.
Thanks, Kim.
Okay. Yeah, this will be a fun experiment. I haven't seen the New York forecast, although I think Mount Kisco Maybe Hastings, our friends in Hastings have done forecasting. So, I can pull an example. Okay, let's do a few more of these terms because this is where it gets to be a little bit confusing. We talked about the most common example of a type of target. It's percent below a baseline year by some time. By 2030, you see a lot more 2030s, and definitely by a 2050 goal. And you can have interim goals. So no reason not to say here's our 2030, our 2040, and our 2050 goal. Easy to model that out in ClearPath. So then the next three terms here on the screen, this is where things get like confused a lot or like interchanged. Decarbonization is basically reducing all your sources of emissions to zero. It kind of what it sounds like. We are producing carbon and we're going to erase the production of carbon. So at this term is not thinking about carbon sinks, carbon removals, any of that. It's just eliminating the sources of emissions to decarbonize to zero. Or decarbonize to something. It's reducing emissions from their source. Second is carbon neutrality. If we are in Europe, they say climate neutrality. But this is in introducing the concept of emissions removals or sequestration. Most often we're thinking about this with trees. Trees or land land types. Wetlands are amazing at sequestering carbon, it turns out. Grasslands also really good at sequestering carbon. So that those lands and how lands store carbon come into play in a carbon neutrality scenario. That came up on one of our calls today. It was like, or one of your presentations, it was like over 20 years, here was the amount of carbon sequestered. It was about half of the emissions produced in a single year. So I'm glad you got to the bottom of what those numbers mean. Land sequestration is hugely valuable. So it should not be underplayed at all, that just based solely on that it's a single years of worth of carbon, something like this, which is we see a range. I think in Phillipstown, where I lived for much of the last 8 years or so, that town has a ton of forests and it has, more importantly, a lot of wetlands and marsh, and that ended up being like a lot more annual emissions are sequestered in those lands. But I want to point out here that in an inventory, we're really thinking about sources of carbon emissions. So we're more focused on this decarbonization step, and we can start to think about that added layer of carbon sinks, forests, trees, etc. at a later stage. I would encourage you not to get hung up on it, or not really put that in the frame of the inventory. Keep real square on sources of emissions. So just want to say that. Also, we're working at a government operations scale. So it's like these are buildings and facilities government owned. When you start to think about land use, there's just a whole different, jurisdictional control and stuff that goes on in that realm too. Which is just another reason not to worry too much at this stage. When we get into planning, we can talk more about carbon sinks. Okay, Mary, don't worry, I'll speed through here on the last little bit. The other phrase you'll hear a lot about is net zero. This is adding another layer of complication, and it really is complicated because it brings in the conversation around offsets and like buying renewable energy from Nevada or something like this. Maybe even purchasing a tract of land in Brazil that will not be deforested, and then claiming those that carbon reduction or savings for your own. Again, that does not factor into an inventory. There's a lot of questionable data around offsets in general. I know you all are very hip and like read about these controversies around carbon credits and stuff. So we won't bring that in unless we're very interested in the planning stage. We can have a conversation about it. It won't factor into our inventory. And just wanted to throw it on here because when you hear net zero, that's like where that comes in. All right. Last terms. This will be very much discussed in our next meeting. And this is science-based targets. And when we say science-based, what we're meaning is the aligned with the Paris Agreement. Because the Paris Agreement is built on like 1,000 scientists from around the world coming together and saying, these science shows climate change will be catastrophic if temperatures on average across the globe warm by 1.5 degrees Celsius or more. So it's like, this is what the science shows. Now, what does each individual community need to do to reduce emissions to make sure we don't blow past that 1.5 degrees? So when we say a science-based target for Beacon or something, we're meaning it's what Beacon would need to reduce in order to help the whole world meet the goal of the Paris Agreement. And factored into that number is not only this kind of like bulk metric tons of carbon, it's also considering equity. So it's understanding that a US local government would need to reduce more so than a local government in Brazil. In most cases, definitely in many of Brazil's neighboring countries. So it's taking an equitable share and not putting all that burden on global South communities, like your sister cities that you may have some places. And what that means is Beacon's science-based targets probably higher than 50%. And we'll talk more about that next time. 50% by 2030, by the way. On track to meet carbon neutrality by 2050. Yes, thank you, Eleanor. Okay. So anyway, you'll get your 2030 target. You'll get your 2050 target. I encourage you to set some targets for those two timeframes minimally. I hope they'll be science-based, but there's, you'll know your local politics around that. Then you can get into that ratcheting down process I talked about. Here's business as usual. What are the like 15 different actions that you're going to need to do? That replacing that boiler is definitely happening in Rhinebeck. That's going to be on this list. So you can already see where your stakeholder engagement is needed. It's to like prioritize what are those 10 actions that are going to be modeled out that meet your goal. So that's what we'll spend the rest of our time on in CAPI. I just want to call out here that the ICLEI did an analysis around we call it the ambition gap, or it's a brief that we put out earlier this year. We'll send it around, but it looked at some of the barriers that prevent local governments from moving from their action plan into the implementation stage. We all know climate plans that just have sat on a shelf. It's very infamous that happens. So what does it take to actually implement? And so that brief determined that for so long, we kind of just said, here are the 5 steps, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Step 3, make your plan. Step 4, do the plan, and then move on, and it's like, okay, as if it was that easy. So this brief attempts to build out that implementation a little bit more. and understanding there's like fine, budgets, municipal budgets are built in, having all your department heads like reorient their plan. Where does the comp plan fit in this? And so much more, even down to like scoping out individual projects, etc. I bring it up now. I said Cappy is going to take us through step 3, the climate plan. But that stakeholder engagement you do is critical for implementation, and it starts with the planning process. So again, we'll get more into that. I'm going to end here so I don't cut into more of Mary's time. But just to say, within this brief, we look at implementation readiness in a number of through a number of fronts, I guess. And though these are them here, it's like leadership, your department leads, your mayor or your council, all of those people are leaders. Agency, what's the ability, like what kind of authority do each of the departments or even your government as a whole have? Capacity is on two different meanings for that: staffing, and then also your fund alignment. That's like, is your community's budget, municipal budget, actually set up to achieve climate goals or social goals or others for that matter? Procurement really comes into play there. Community involvement, and then partnerships. So you can kind of use this to rank your community of where you are. And that may be an exercise we all do together at the beginning of the climate planning stage. And you may be great in one area and need improvement in others. That's in fact how it works for all of us. So I'm gonna just stop there. Here's a reminder of good communications, and this is kind of where we're gonna pick up here in the next session and the one after that. So I will end my portion right there.
Thanks, Cal. That was really interesting, and I know we're going to be talking a lot more about that in the next meeting and subsequent meetings. So, if a lot of it is new to you, don't worry. We'll again we'll be talking about it again, and I'll make that presentation that Cal just shared with us available on the CAPI website, so you can find it there after this meeting. So now I'm going to share my screen, and I'm going to quickly go through some of the questions that have been asked in the past month since our last meeting. So we're going to go from the global level down to the municipal level, because it's our job to get you through this process. And I know some of you are ahead of others, but no fear, we're going to all get there, and it's not a race. And again, just communicate with us if you are having challenges that you think either we could help with, or even just to talk it through with us. We're here to help you. So, oops, sorry, let me just go back to the beginning here and start here. All right, so just to get this out of the way, some of you have finished your inventory, some haven't. So if you have not completed your inventory yet in ClearPath, some questions to ask. Have you uploaded your remaining data? Have you documented assumptions and methods as needed in the notes section of each record? I've been kind of following along on some of the quality assurance process that ICLEI is going through, and have noticed a little bit of a trend here that many of the notes, the notes field in many of the records are not filled out. So just a reminder, if you can document the assumptions and methods there, and also attach any relevant data requests or anything really related to that record that you think would be helpful for the next person who comes along to do this inventory. It's always a good idea. Even if it's you might not remember how you got the numbers. So the more information related to that record that you can put in the notes field or upload to the record, the better. And then also make sure that all of your records are represented in your pie chart. Some might not be appearing. They'll there are different reasons for that, but if they're not, just let us know and we can help you troubleshoot. And then, of course, when you think you're ready, you're done, notify us, and ICLEI will do a data quality check and send some notes. Caroline's been great about doing those, and her notes, I think, are very helpful. Okay, so moving right along here. For those of you who finished your inventory and who are working on the report, have you populated the report with the municipal overview and background information? Have you pasted in the relevant bar and pie charts from ClearPath? The report section will become your friend. If you've gone into the report section, great. If you haven't yet, I really recommend that. Take a look. You can export many graphs and tables. I'll talk a little bit more about that later, but you know, there's a lot there that you can use for your inventory report. Have you documented findings and assumptions in your report? So in other words, what you've put in the notes section, have those been copied over into the report? And then again, when you feel your draft is ready, please notify us and we will review your report for you. Just as a reminder, our next meeting on Wednesday, July 19th will be in person. So I hope all of you can make it back to the Cornell Cooperative Extension. It's a great facility, and it will be, I think, really fun to see everyone again and to do the remainder of these presentations in person. And just a note, we all have some vacations coming up. So if you can't reach us, that's why. I'll try and be answering email while I'm gone, but I may be slow to respond, so just a heads up. Okay, so quick 10 questions. First one, do I need to edit my parameters in ClearPath? Yes is the quick answer. You want to put your baseline year in, your population, and that's the population of the municipality for the baseline year. You want to keep your status as in progress, and when the inventory is approved by ICLEI, you move that status to complete. You'll want to check the box that says official inventory for selected year, but other than that, all additional information can be left blank. Question 2, do I need to add anything to the note section of the record in ClearPath? We've already talked about this, but just again, as a reminder, please add any and all data assumptions and gaps. Enter information on the date of entry and maybe who entered the record would be helpful at times as well. So you can track any changes that are made. Again, that's contact information for the person who provided you the record. Attach any data request responses. Also, you might even want to consider uploading your master Excel spreadsheet in certain places, if that makes sense, given how much information you might have in there, and given that it might be difficult to locate that master spreadsheet at a later date. Again, this is all to make it easier for those who come after you to understand the methods used for future inventories. Question 3, where can I find my total emissions in ClearPath? So this is something that is important for you to just have a sense of what the CO2e is for your inventory, and you can do that if you go into the reports tab. There are several reports that where you can tally up the total emissions. One, and probably the easiest one, is in the inventory by scope. So here you see on the right, the graphic here has scope 1, 2, and 3, and if you just add up those CO2 equivalents, you will find your total emissions. You can also find it in the sector report and in the comparison reports, which I'll talk a little bit more about later. Question 4, which grade electricity factor set do I use in ClearPath? Again, just nuts and bolts. This should be the upstate factor set, and I do believe some of you will see that it's defaulted to Westchester, so you will need to change that. So just be on the lookout if you go into buildings and facilities and your factor set is defaulted to Westchester, please change it to upstate. Yeah, I'm just gonna kind of breeze through this because we're getting low on time. This is a very specific question, but it's come up several times already. There's a actual table on page 17 or 18 of the greenhouse gas inventory report template that asks for miles per gallon and emission factors by vehicle type. That is something you should be able to download in the report. It should come up automatically, but if it doesn't, this is a link to a spreadsheet that has all the information by vehicle type. So, feel free to use this if it, for some reason, doesn't automatically download from ClearPath in your report. Question 6, I'm trying to run the report inventory comparison by scope, but I'm getting an error message. So just a little tip here, if you do want to compare inventories by year, you do need to go into the parameters and click the box official inventory for selected year. That will allow these inventories to come up in the comparison by sector report. Question 7, is it okay if I'm not finished my inventory report by the July meeting? Yes, absolutely. We understand summer is tricky with vacations. We'll be moving on to the initial stages of the climate action plan in August, but there is padding in our schedule. So that should allow you time to wrap up the inventory report and move on to the climate action plan if needed. And I know Kale talked a little bit about next steps. Today, we'll be going over that material at our next meeting and probably into the fall. So again, really no worries if you're falling behind. And again, please reach out to us. Let us know how we can help. Question 8, what do we do next if we're done with our inventory in ClearPath and our inventory report? So for those of you that are have completed both or are about to complete both, please come to office hours and Kale will walk through forecasting and target setting for you. You can also, just a few things that might be helpful, you can upload your inventory report now to the CSC portal, even if you're not submitting it right away. You can upload it and write up the report just so that it's ready to go when you do submit for Climate Smart Communities points. You can also familiarize yourself with the CSC PE Action 2, the Government Operations Climate Action Plan. There's some good information there. And also read through and familiarize yourself with the CAP template, which is on the Dutchess CAPI website. Question 9, will we be doing the PE2 public outreach component of the Government Operations Climate Action Plan? Yes, this is worth the additional 4 points. So 16 points in total for the climate action plan and the outreach component. And kind of following off on the last question, one thing you can do now, if you have some extra time, is to look at the DEC CSC Inclusive Community Engagement Primer. So this provides guidance and best practices for reaching disadvantaged communities, especially those that may be disproportionately impacted or unfairly burdened by climate change. We'll be talking about this more at the next meeting, but the outreach component is considered best practice and something that there's a lot of great information about in this primer. So definitely recommend you take a look at it either now or at a later date. And then lastly, oops, let's just go here. Should we keep track of our hours in SharePoint? Just a quick reminder, yes, please do. I know it's just one of those administrative tasks, which is no fun, but please do keep track of all your hours, including the CAPI meetings. And if you have someone who is designated as your timekeeper, I've seen for some communities that works really well, just to make sure that that one person puts everyone's hours in. So thank you all. Thanks again for your patience and for all of your hard work. I know Kale and I have been really impressed by what you guys have done to date. And I unfortunately don't think we have time for breakout rooms, but the good news is that we'll be meeting in person at the next meeting. So I'm hoping that we can spend a lot of time at that meeting talking about amongst ourselves about challenges and next steps. And I do hope that if you guys aren't going to be able to make the meeting, you'll let us know, because we'll just want to get a sort of rough count at least of numbers. But I think it will be it would be really great to have anyone there. So any last minute questions or anything you want to add, Cal, before we sign off?
No, I don't think anything to add, and just say I'm sorry I went long on time, so I cut into our breakout rooms, but I'm glad we'll all be together next time.
Great. All right. Well, thanks everyone. And we look forward to seeing you in July, and happy summer.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.